Hello again. It's been a while. I was trying to think of what video to do recently, and I was trying to come up with some sort of theme. And I thought, well, maybe it might be interesting to talk about myths that have inspired great works of music. I mean, that stories that inspired some great composers. There's a lot of composers that have looked at the myths and legends of the world, especially of their own country, to inspire them to write works. Uh, Perhaps that as a person who's listened to classical music for a long time, there's two people that really stand out: Richard Wagner and the Finnish composer Jean Sibelius. Now, a lot of people who even have a little interest in classical music, they've heard of Wagner, Richard Wagner. He primarily wrote operas, or if you want to really get technical, music drama, and he was very inspired by Germanic mythology. He wrote various works, various operas based on the German myths. For example, he wrote one work called Lohengrin, which is about the Swan knights. He wrote another work called Tannhausser, which is about this young man who gets seduced by this old pagan goddess that's hiding out in the mountain, and he tries to ask for forgiveness by the Pope, and the Pope says, when this staff sprouts leaves, then you'll be forgiven. It turns out it sprouted leaves. I don't know. I never saw the opera. I don't know how much that's true to the story, but that's basically part of the story. He wrote Parsifal, which is basically the Holy Grail story. There's a lot of different versions of the Grail story. The oldest goes back to a French story by Chrétien called Parsifal. However, there is a Germanic version, a very famous Middle-High German, medieval German version by a guy named Wolfgang von Eschenbach. It's called Parsifal. It's the medieval German version. It's a wonderful work of literature, and it's basically the story of the Grail, the Holy Grail story, about a rather naive knight who comes across this mysterious castle, and he's given a riddle and he fails, and he goes on this spiritual quest until he finds the castle again to find out the riddle of the Grail that he failed the first time. The Grail in this version is a stone, and it's guarded by the Templar Knights. And Wagner, I'm sure Wagner must have known about this work when he did it. But perhaps the crowning achievement of Wagner's work is the Ring of the Nibelungs. This is a 4-opera cycle. It's massive. I actually sat through it, but when it was on TV. I didn't actually go to the theater. I sat through. It's about 15, 16 hours. Okay, the first opera is called Das Rheingold, and it's basically about how the lecherous dwarf Alberic steals the gold of the Rhine, and he fashions this cursed ring. And then the next story is Die Walküre, which is about the Valkyrie. That's Brunhilde, and how she disobeys Odin, and he surrounds. In the opera, he's called Wotan, and he surrounds her in a wall of fire. And only the bravest knight will get through the fire and rescue her. Other than that, she's going to be in there, cooped up in there. And then the third story is Siegfried, which is our hero, and goes and rescues Brunhilde because he's brave enough to go through the fire. And then finally, there's Götterdämmerung, which is the Twilight of the Gods, where Siegfried is treacherously slain by being stabbed in the back, and his funeral pyre, Brunhilde jumps in the funeral pyre to die with him, and then the fire supposedly goes up and brings down Valhalla, sets Valhalla on fire. So that's the problem I have with Wagner. I love the ancient myths. I don't really like what Wagner did to them. I like his music, but a lot of what he did is weird. For example, the story of Siegfried and Brunhilde is one story, and and Ragnarok, which is what Gotterdammerung is about, is basically another story about how the gods come to their ends. The two of them have really little to do with each other, but Wagner kind of squishes them together in a strange way, which I don't really like, but that's a matter of opinion. Wagner, of course, probably used various sources for the Ring of the Nibelungs. It's funny, when you think of the story of Siegfried and Brunhilde and the Wall of Fire, sometimes this has been called the Iliad of the North. We think of that story as kind of like the great heroic tale of Scandinavia and Iceland, and there isn't one single book that you could read if you want to know the story. There's of course the Icelandic version, which is the Saga of the Volsungs, and then you have I don't have a copy with me right now, but in my other video I'm going to write these books down. Don't worry, in the comments, and also you may want to visit my other. Site, my other YouTube video, which talks about the myths of Scandinavian myths and legends, Norwegian Norse myths. You have the Icelandic version, which is the Saga of the Volsung, and then you have an Austrian version called the Song of the Nibelungs. And of course you have versions of these stories in bits and pieces in other works too, especially the Eddas, the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, which are the great source books of Norse mythology. Okay, let's leave Wagner alone. The other great composer that I wanted to talk about, there's a few others, but this one is known a little less than Wagner. I love him. His name is Jan Sibelius. He was a Finnish composer, and he based a lot of his work on Finnish mythology. Now, Finnish mythology has one really, really amazing book. It's called the Kalevala. And in here, there's all the stuff that inspired our friend Sibelius. One of his works is I forgot to show you some CDs. Here's Wagner. Here's a selection of music from the Ring of the Nibelungs without any of the singing. And here's Sibelius. I have a CD. Yeah, I still listen to CDs. Don't laugh. And I have albums too. Sibelius wrote several works based on Finnish mythology. One of them is a great. He wrote a lot of things called tone poems, which are basically short musical works. And one of them is called Tapiola, which is basically the forest in Finnish mythology, and it's headed by a god named Tapio. It's a wonderful piece of music, and he wrote various other works based on Finnish mythology. Another collection of works is called Lemminkainenn Legends. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. There's a hero in the Kalevala called Lemminkainenn, and Sibelius wrote 4 works based on his exploits. This particular CD has 2 Lemminkainenn legends. See his name there, Lemminkainenn, and he wrote in this particular version. It has Lemminkainenn's Return, and another work called, this is the real famous one, the Swan of Tuonela. Out of the 4 Lemminkainenn works, the Swan of Tuonela is a masterpiece. It seems to be a staple of the orchestra. It's like any general collection you have of Jan Sibelius is going to have the Swan of Tuonela. It's basically part of the story of Lemminkainenn. What happens is that there's this. I forgot to name it's important to know that in order to tell the story of the Swan of Tuonela, there's another work that Sibelius wrote called Pohjola's Daughter. It's also known as the Daughter of Northland. Now you got Pohjola's Daughter and you have the Swan of Tuonela. Now, what happens is that, let me give you a little background mythology. What happened is that you have these heroes in Finland, in an area known as Kalevala. But in the north, you have this mysterious dark area of evil called Pohjola. And it's ruled over by a witch named Lohi. Okay? But Lohi had this really rockin' daughter. And all the heroes wanted to marry her. So, one of the heroes, Lemminkainenn, tried and to woo her, but in order to win her as a bride, Louhi, her mother, set him impossible tasks, and he manages to get pretty far, but one of the tasks is to kill the Swan of Tuonela. Now, you have Pohjola in the north, and you have Tapiola, which is the forest, but there's another realm called Tuonela, which is the land of the dead. And there's a river that runs through Tuonela, and there's a swan that's always singing this ghostly song. Okay, so you got and that's the Swan of Tuonela. Okay, so, and one of the tasks that Lemminkainenn had to perform in order to win the daughter of Louhi, Pohjola's daughter, was he had to kill the Swan of Tuonela. And he's about to do it, but he's murdered by his enemy called Soppy Hat. Yeah, Soppy Hat. But luckily, he was a bit of a mama's boy, and when his mother found out he died, she actually travels to Tuonela, and she gets this huge rake. And she combs the entire river and rakes pieces of his body onto the shore. And she sews them back together. And the Kalevala is known for this magic, singing. She sang these spells, and they were so powerful that the goddess of life herself came. And Lemminkainenn's mother managed to resurrect her son. Yeah. So Lemminkainenn came back to life and as strong as ever, and he went on further exploits that were very heroic, but he never won the daughter of Northlands. She wound up going to somebody else. But it's okay. It turns out as you read the story on, as you read to the end of Kalevala, she was kind of a bitch anyway. So the Kalevala is it's a really, really interesting work. There's a lot of great stories like that. So yeah, you have and Sean Sibelius wrote other works based on Finnish mythology, but keep those in mind. The Swan of Tuonela, Pohjola's daughter, also known as the daughter of Northland, and Tapiola. But I'm going to write these down below. Now, moving on, I want to talk about Mussorgsky, Modest Mussorgsky. Now, anybody who knows anything about classical music knows that Modest Mussorgsky wrote a work called Pictures at an Exhibition. Most people know the orchestrated version, but he actually just wrote it for piano. It was orchestrated later by other composers. But one of the works is actually a work called The Hut on Chicken Lakes. And it's very interesting because that hut belongs to a very, very important witch in Russian folklore called Baba Yaga. And I forgot to pull this out. I pulled this out. Oops, sorry, wrong book. And Baba Yaga is actually this very important witch. And she does live in a hut in the middle of the forest, and the hut is sitting on chicken legs. And it could rotate because the legs move and the house can turn. And if you go and visit her, she's like in her own little world, her own little universe. She's almost like this goddess figure. As you approach close to her hut, you'll see a man in black and another man in white and another knight on a horse in red. And this is actually her own personal system. The knight in black represents night, her darkness. The knight in white represents her daylight. The knight in red represents her sunrise. So she lives in her own little universe, and her hut is surrounded by this gate that's made up of human bones, and on various points along the gate, there's a skull, and at night light glows out of their eyes. It's really cool. As a matter of fact, I have this wonderful illustrated book I have here called Wizards and Witches by Time Life Books. It's a collection of books about myths and legends. There's this really great work here called, let's see, where can I find Baba Yaga? Oh my God. Here's Vasilisa, one of the stories of Baba Yaga, and here's the skulls that surround her hut, and let's see, and there's let me find Baba Yaga herself. I know she's here somewhere hiding from me. Oh, here she is. she rides through the air on a pestle and mortar, and she's like, she's very scary, and she's very skinny, and her nose reaches down and almost meets her chin, which sticks out, and she's very frightening, and you don't want to meet her. But she figures in a lot of folk tales in Russian mythology. One of the stories has to do with Vasilisa, which is that woman I showed you holding. It's one of those stories where she's mistreated by her step family, as usual, and she's forced to go to Baba Yaga to get something, and Baba Yaga gives her impossible task, and if she doesn't complete them, she's in trouble. But she's got this magical doll that her mother gave to her before she died, and this creepy little doll can talk and do all kinds of miraculous things. So Vasilisa is saved because she can do the impossible tasks, and Baba Yaga gives her one of the skulls, and when she takes it home, fire shoots out of the eyes of the skull and kills her evil stepfamily. So that's the story of Vasilisa. But there are many, many folk tales. So Baba Yaga is actually one of the stories that Mussorgsky tells musically in one of his pictures. So Pictures at an Exhibition is a series of short musical pieces based on an art exhibit that he visited after his friend died, Mussorgsky. And supposedly one of these paintings that Mussorgsky's friend displayed was supposedly a hut on chicken legs, which is the hut of Baba Yaga. So that's why it's included as one of the pieces in Pictures at an Exhibition. Wonderful piece of work. I think you should hunt it out and listen to it. And Baba Yaga is such an important figure that here's my copy on CD. Pictures at an Exhibition by Mussorgsky. And also, Baba Yaga is such a popular figure that Rimsky-Korsakov actually has a short musical work called Faerie Tale. But it's also subtitled Baba Yaga, I believe, because it has to do with Baba Yaga, but he also calls it Faerie Tale. So Rimsky-Korsakov actually has a short musical work called Faerie Tale, which is based on Baba Yaga. Rimsky-Korsakov, if you remember, is actually more famous for Scheherazade, a much larger musical work that's in 4 parts. It's like a symphony, and Scheherazade is of course based on the major figure in the Arabian Nights, the 1001 Nights. Scheherazade is the woman that tells her husband a story every night, but she leaves something unfinished so that the husband can listen to her tell another story the next night. So Scheherazade is also a work that is based on a great legend, the legend of Scheherazade and the 1001 Nights. We're almost done here because I'm spending a lot of time on this. I want to mention very briefly Stravinsky. Stravinsky here is a great composer. He wrote a ballet called The Firebird. He wrote several ballets, but he wrote music to a ballet called The Firebird Suite, another Russian legend, Ivan and the Firebird and Grey Wolf. I'm going to write that down, don't worry. And I want to talk about just briefly 2 more composers. There's, getting back to Mussorgsky, he also wrote a work called Night on Bald Mountain or Bear Mountain, which I think this is more legend and superstition rather than mythology. Night on Bald Mountain is a musical work that is one movement, and it's about a witch's sabbath on a mountaintop. It's got great music, great scary little bits, and if you remember the movie Fantasia by Walt Disney, it's actually the last piece where the devil is on top of a mountain. There's all kinds of dancing demons all around him, and that's Night on Bald Mountain by Mussorgsky. And another great composer that I absolutely love is Saint-Saens, Camille Saint-Saens, a French composer, and he wrote another work that kind of reminds me a lot of Night on Bald Mountain. It's a one movement work called Danse Macabre. I think you could see it here, Danse Macabre. And that's also like a type of witch's sabbath, although I believe it's more on Halloween. I think the story goes on Halloween, death comes and resurrects the dead, and they all kind of have this crazy dance together. He plays this violin, and it resurrects the dead, and in the piece you hear the violin playing. It's really creepy, and then there's something like a xylophone that's supposed to sound like dancing skeletons. That's really cool too. So that's Saint-Saens' Danse Macabre. And I think that's it. I used up enough of your time. A little sad news for those who enjoy my videos. I had a loss recently. In previous videos, you might have seen me show you my black cat, Willow. Sometimes you might have heard her too. She sometimes meows in the background. She passed away last February. She was a great companion of almost 18 years. I had to say goodbye to her. She was very old and very sick, and I miss her very much. And however, I trudged on. I stayed without a cat for a while, and recently, about a month ago, I adopted two wonderful kittens. Their names are Eric and Owen. Eric is from Eric the Red, the Saga. Also, Eric and Enid, which is an Arthurian story, and Owen is from another great Arthurian story from the story of Owain. So I adopted them. They're two wonderful little kittens, Eric and Owen. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you for listening. And I usually never say this, but everybody who makes videos on YouTube says it. So I'll say it once. If you really like this video, I'd love for you to like it and subscribe if you can. And that's the only time I'm ever going to say it because it's annoying. Everybody says it. Anyway, thank you.